Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight I'm in the Sierra Nevada and we have a story about two moose hunters up in Ontario, Canada, who are very familiar with the area, and they find something while they're hunting that's very frightening and surreal. That's next. Check this out. Look at this tree. It's not broken. It's just almost like it got pushed over or something. Pretty crazy. All right, I'm hiking through some thick forest. I'm in the Sierra Nevada, and I'm heading to a small pond that I've been finding with my GPS. Love these little ponds. Okay, back in the open here. This is great. I love this area. It's very much open with the rocks and stuff all over. Granite. This is all granite country. Pretty amazing. Check out these wildflowers. Isn't that awesome? It's a great time of year. I believe that's called fireweed. I'm not 100% positive on that, but whatever it is, it's beautiful. There's some water. Oh, this is foggy. A little spooky back here. Look at this. Wow. There it is. Look at that. This is a completely different pond. I don't think we could survive here. Mosquitoes are much too thick. It's literally a swamp, and there's a big old cliff right behind me there. Look at the mosquitoes. Not a good place for story time. Woo! Yeah, this is spooky back in here. I'm going back to the other one. Okay guys, I found a good spot. I'm not down by the ponds. The mosquitoes were really thick down by both ponds. Beautiful little ponds though. That first one was a little spooky down there. Big cliff off to one side, really swampy in the back, and these dead trees and mosquitoes and really thick. I was like, I don't want to be down here after dark. So speaking of dark, I have a dark beer tonight. It's a brown ale. This is called Moose Drool. And that is from the Big Sky Brewing Company out of Missoula, Montana. That's 5% alcohol by name. I don't know how they go about making this beer, if the moose come into a waiting room and spit into a cup or something. I don't want to know how they make moose drool, but I'm sure it's pretty good. So, oh, I've been doing a lot of hiking, so there you go. I'm going to do the old... blow it off the top there. No pine needles in my cup tonight. See if I can get it. Oh, look at how rich and dark that is. Look at that. A little sloppy tonight, but who cares? I'm out here. Ooh. That is a really robust beer. It's malty, very flavorful, almost like a rich flavor. It's not too bitter. I was expecting it to be more bitter and the finish. So, Moose Drool. Cheers. So our story takes place in Ontario, Canada. It's a very large province. It's right in the middle of the country, and it goes all the way from Toronto, Canada to the Manitoba border in the west. It's got thousands and thousands of lakes. Many of them are roadless. It's roadless country. And people will fly in with float planes and be dropped off and go fishing for several days or even a week or more. It's amazing country. It's north of Ontario is Hudson Bay. South of there is the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, and it's an amazing province in Canada. So our story takes place in northwest Ontario in a small community called Red Lake. And as far as I could tell on the map, Red Lake is kind of like the end of the road. There's a road that comes up, there's a community called Red Lake, and then beyond that, it's mostly roadless country. It's pretty amazing. And this is where Troy grew up. He was living there in 1990. He spent most of his life in that region. He's moved around somewhat, and he was good friends with Mike. And they both grew up going to school together, hunting, fishing, and really good friends. And they decided to go on a moose hunt. They'd done this before, and Mike had seen some moose earlier down by an area called Dixie Lake, and they were going to take their quads, put their camping gear and their 30-06s on the back, and then take this side road and hit these trails and move through the forest, going through meadows, thick forests, marshy areas, swamps, and lakes, and just look for moose and do a moose hunt. So Troy and Mike finalized their plans. They got their maps, their hunting gear, all their camping gear, loaded up Mike's truck, got the trailer hooked up, got the quads, headed south from Red Lake, and they were near Dixie Lake, turned off onto the main road of Dixie Lake Road, and then went on a side road, and then they were looking for a place to spend the night camp. They wanted to get up early the next morning and start their moose hunt. They found a nice spot, pulled in, there was trees around it like this, and then they had the road right here, and they thought this was a great spot. They got the tents up, had a small fire pit, collected some firewood, and had MREs for dinner. They wanted to keep things simple so they could focus on their gear and their guns and any details so they could get up early and just hit it. They finished their meal, and it's October, and it got dark much quicker. About 8:30, almost 9 o'clock, they heard off in the distance this howl, and I'm going to play that right now for you guys. So that is the sound that Troy and Mike heard that night, and they heard 4 of them in about a minute and a half's time, and then they didn't hear anything else. And they were speculating like that could be a wolf, but it just doesn't sound like a wolf, and they both agreed it was not a bear. And mountain lions are not common in Ontario, from what I know. Mountain lions in Canada are mostly found in Alberta and British Columbia. There's been a few sightings in Ontario, but they're just not common. And so they were really unsure what they were listening to and what they'd heard. And then Mike said, I don't know if you knew this, but my grandpa had a story that I remember him telling me when I was younger. And he said, about 6-7 years ago, my grandpa was at our house. He was on the back porch, and we were talking to him, and he was telling us about World War II, and he was a gunner on a Navy ship, and he was explaining and telling stories about a few battles that he'd been in, and they were really enthralled with his stories. And Mike asked him, I think he was 15 or 16 at the time, and he asked him, what's the scariest thing you ever saw? And he expected a story about World War II, and the grandpa got quiet, and they're on the back porch. It's in the evening, lights on, the smaller kids went to sleep, and he's sitting there with Mike, his dad, and his grandpa's in the middle. And his grandpa said, in 1948, I was with a good friend of mine, and we were in Quetico Provincial Park. And now Quetico Provincial Park is this vast park filled with lakes, and it's a designated roadless canoe fishing area. And it's adjacent to the Minnesota border, which is the Boundary Waters canoe area, is adjacent to that. So it's this vast area of lakes and wilderness and moose. And in fact, this provincial park, Quetico, is 1,180,000 acres of unroaded land. Amazing country. They were fishing here, and they came in late at night after a good day of fishing, and they were around their campfire cleaning some fish, enjoying a good time, having a conversation, and they heard something just in the brush behind them. And his grandpa said he took the lantern and walked over to the edge of the camp where it was starting to get dark and the firelight no longer cast over there. And he thought he saw a shadow, like a shape with a head on it, in the brush, just 10, 12 feet away. Wasn't sure what he was looking at. He thought it was maybe just a shadow. He held up the lantern really high, and it illuminated whatever this was. And this thing was sitting low, squatting, and it stood up really slow like that. And it was 7 feet tall, and it was just towering over Mike's grandfather. And his grandfather almost dropped the lantern. He was so afraid. And he just stared at this thing just for a few moments, 3, maybe 4 seconds, maybe 5 seconds. And he said he called it a hairy man. Now, this was before Bigfoot was coined in the late 50s. And he said this large hairy man stood up, stared at me, and then it just turned and disappeared into the forest. And Mike said, that's all we could get out of him. That's all he said. And he was done talking. And he could see that his hands were like trembling. And he told this to Troy around their campfire. And so now Troy was thinking, I wonder what this was that we really heard. And so it really got him thinking about Sasquatch and Bigfoot. So they both went to sleep, had no issues that night. They got up early the next day, about 5:30, had all their gear out, ready to go. The quads were loaded, had their 30-06s on the back of their quads. And they took off down this road, went on the side road that Mike had talked about. And they're passing meadows and then going through forests and past marshy areas. And there was even a point where Troy saw this blueberry patch. He remembered as a kid coming here with his family and doing a blueberry picking. And they had a lot of good memories and hunting in this area, and they were really comfortable and familiar with this area. About an hour and a half later, they're still riding, kind of looking around, doing their hunting, and Mike pulls up next to Troy while they're riding on this trail. And this is not a trail like a little trail through the forest. It's like a one-lane road, mostly grass, and there's trees on each side and marshes and things. And he pulls up next to him and he says, "This is the area where I saw that moose last summer, right through in this area." And Troy was listening to Mike, and then Mike said, "I think I'm gonna go ahead and follow this road and keep looking." And then Troy said, "Well, I'm gonna stay here and have my snack and take a little break and kind of watch for things. We'll wait for you to come back," because the road was a dead end. And so Mike took off, and you could hear his quad going up, and then on the other side of this hill come down. You could still hear the quad off in the distance. And he looked up towards where the quad went. You could see a long ways that way, 100 yards or so, and he looked back. You could see 50, 75 yards that way. Gets off his quad, pulls his pack off, pulls out his pop and his sandwich. He starts eating the sandwich. And about a minute later, he hears something moving through the forest, really loud, like making a commotion, coming through the forest, just past the area where Mike had just ridden past 2 minutes earlier. And Troy's listening to this and reaches back, and he's keeping an eye in this area, and he reaches back and he unclicks his case for his 30-06 and opens it on the back rack of the quad. And you can hear what sounds like footsteps, but they're loud thuds coming through the forest. And he's expecting a moose, maybe a bear, something large, because it was making a lot of noise. And then it was quiet for 5-8 seconds. And then it stepped out and he saw it. At first he thought he was looking at another hunter, but it was very large. It was human looking, but not quite. And then he was thinking, wait, this guy's gonna get himself killed. It's hunting season and he's wearing all black. Then he thought, this could not be a man. Whatever this was took 2 steps into the middle of the trail and had its back turned towards Troy. It was looking in the direction where Mike had just gone with his quad. He could see this massive back, this muscular arms, very long arms, this smallish head, and this long black hair flowing in the breeze. And it was quiet, and he's just watching this thing, and it was unaware of Troy standing next to his quad. And then it turned, and it looked right at him. And there was this moment where they're staring at each other. He had this chill come over him, and it wasn't of total fear. It was almost in awe of this thing. And you could see there was almost a surprised look on this thing's face. It was as it was staring right at Troy. He felt he was almost in a trance. It was this surreal feeling. He knew he had his gun right behind him, and he didn't feel like he wanted to grab the gun because he knew that it would change the moment. He was just kind of waiting to see what this thing was going to do. Troy said this was not a bear, it was not a moose, it was not a man. He wasn't quite sure what it was yet. Still trying to figure it out. He said it was 7 feet tall, and it was very frightening, but it was not threatening, like I said. And then it turned its head and looked, kind of cocked its head, was looking at him, and it put its nose up in the air, and it sniffed. Like it was trying to smell him almost. Then it made this grunt sound, and then it turned in its original direction and kept going. It went down this embankment on the other side of the trail, came up the other side, and it reached out and grabbed the poplar tree with its hand twisted with its thumb up like that, grabbed the poplar tree, pulled itself up the embankment, and disappeared into the forest. As it was moving through the forest, it made absolutely no noise at all. It was just like the opposite of how it came in with all this commotion, and as it left, it was dead quiet. Really kind of crazy. Troy's standing there, he's shaken, and suddenly he feels this fear kind of kick in. Like after the fact, almost like taking a shot of whiskey, and you just feel, oh, it's nice and warm, and then all of a sudden it kind of hits you. And he had this fear start to take over a little bit, but he still felt comfortable. He had his gun, and his friend was up ahead, and so he grabbed his 30-06 and he walked towards where he last saw this thing. And he stood there kind of breathing heavy, just trying to figure out what the heck happened. He was thinking, was this like a crazy hermit that's living in the forest? And he just didn't understand what he was really seeing. He was standing there waiting for Mike to come back, and he could hear his quad come over the hill, and then he was coming down the trail towards Troy, and then Troy waved at him. Mike pulled up, turned off the quad, and said, "What's going on? What's wrong?" And you could tell something was wrong. And Troy said, "Did you hear or see anything weird as you went that way and exploring?" Mike said, "No, nothing. I didn't even see any sign of moose. And he said, I want to tell you something, but I need you to keep this secret. He swore him to secrecy because he didn't want this getting out. I don't know what it is, maybe small communities in the rural Canada. And if you found out that you had some weird experience that everybody else hasn't had, I don't know. But he swore him to secrecy, and then he told him what had happened since he had just left. Troy told Mike that this thing had this long black hair, kind of see it blowing in the wind, and this thing had looked like a football player in full equipment, full uniform, except it didn't have this V-shaped waist. It was very stocky, very blocky and stocky. And they both agreed this couldn't have been, some kind of hermit or homeless person living in the forest. It had to be a Sasquatch. And then Mike got off his quad and he said, where did he go in? And he went in, showed him the direction to the south that he went into the forest. And it had snowed just a light dusting that morning. There was some still snow in the forest. It was shady. And they both went in there and were looking for tracks. They saw some impressions in the snow, but they weren't very definitive. They weren't very well defined. And while Mike was down on one knee looking, and Troy was standing up, kind of looking in the forest, keeping an eye on things, they both suddenly heard this really loud, sound like a baseball bat hitting a tree, just really loud, almost like a gunshot. Startled both of them. Mike, since he was looking down, looked up at Troy. He said, did you just throw a rock or something? And Troy said, no, absolutely not. And then they looked at each other, and then they both got up and started running out of the forest. They were in the forest about 15, 20 feet. Mike jumps on his quad, gets his helmet on, and starts down the trail. Troy hits the trail, and he's running as fast as he can with full hunting gear on, with his rifle in one hand, and he's heading for his quad. Mike passes him as he's running towards his quad. Troy gets to the quad. Mike has already stopped and was looking over his shoulder and said, hurry, let's go. Troy grabs his rifle, throws it in the case, locks the case, secures it, takes his right hand, sweeps the pop and the sandwich off the seat of the quad, grabs his helmet, didn't even strap it, jumped on, started. It took him a couple tries to start it. They both take off and they're going really fast. Troy said faster than they should have, but they needed to get out of there. They got back to where they had camped, got the quads onto the trailer, jumped in and left. And they'd already packed up their camp gear, so they were ready to go, and they got out of there. Troy also said he does not want to be known for this. He doesn't want to be associated with it. He just wanted to tell it. Also, Mike and Troy both agreed that it seemed like this Sasquatch heard them coming and hid in the forest. And then when it heard Mike, it stepped out onto the trail thinking they had both left. And then it realized that Troy was still there. Also, Troy said it made a lot of commotion when it came through the forest. And it had its back turned. And then when it noticed Troy, it was absolutely quiet, like a silent movie. Really crazy. This is an experience that Troy will remember the rest of his life. And even though it wasn't threatening, it still haunts him. Just knowing that something like this actually exists in the wilderness of Ontario, Canada. And that is our story for tonight. And I got bugs on my head. Oh, what a beautiful night. We still got some birds making some noise in these trees over here. And this place is gonna go dead quiet though, once another 5-10 minutes when it's pitch black. So we better get out of here. I need to head right in through here to get out of here. So if you want to join me for a little hike in the wilderness as it's getting dark, Let's go. Now I'm thinking about that story that Mike told about his grandpa with the lantern. Yeah. He saw the 7-foot Sasquatch like 10, 12 feet away. We're good. We're all good here. It is. It's kind of marshy down here. Look at this. It's a little spooky back in here too. Wow. All right, keep it moving. All right, we're almost to the road. It's gotta be that way. Who's out there? It's like those old movies. Show yourself. I'm not afraid. And then the monster comes out. I'm afraid. I don't blame him. All right, last stretch here. Oh, it's getting dark. Look at this forest here. It's just pitch black. It's like a hole. Oh! There's the road. All right, there's my turnoff. Right there, that sign. Oh, a little moon going on up there. The forest is now dead quiet. I hear nothing besides a little hum of mosquitoes flying around my head. All right, here's my turnoff. It's actually darker than it looks in the camera. It's funny. All right, here's the first pond right here. Really eerie looking. And yet beautiful at the same time. There's that peak. I want to climb that someday. It's a little rugged getting up there. But we can do it if we got enough time, so. All right, here's my truck. Yay. Home sweet home. Home sweet going home. All right, you guys, thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. And if you guys like my videos, check out the rest of my channel here for more videos like this. Really appreciate it. And as always, we'll see you next time and keep hiking.